Bangladesh's second independence after 71 years came in the July 24th public coup. What happened in the popular uprising of 24? Today's video shows how the dictatorship was dealt with. A dawn written in crimson, the second independence. 1. The wall of silence and the damp mess in Farmgate. For several days, the July sky over Dhaka had been covered by an unusually heavy, leaden sheet of clouds. A steady drizzle was falling, yet it brought no coolness. The air itself seemed trapped with a suffocating stench of burnt tire ashes, humidity, and gunpowder. In a damp mess apartment on the 4th floor of an old building tucked inside an alley at Farmgate lived Sabbir. He was a final-year master's student in the Department of History at Dhaka University. Quiet and wearing spectacles, Sabbir's life revolved around a strict routine: the university library, preparing for the BCS exams, and managing mess expenses with the limited money sent by his father from Kushtia. Sabbir had always kept his distance from street rallies, slogans, or student movements. His simple calculation was, for middle-class boys like us, the primary duty is to stand on our own feet first. If I land a job, the family's hard days will finally fade. His father, Azharul Islam, a retired primary school teacher in Kushtia, would call on the 5th of every month. His first words on the phone were always, "Sabbir, son, are you focusing properly on your studies in the mess? Stay completely away from the troubles on the streets of Dhaka. Our backs are against the wall. Your getting a job is crucial for us." Wiping his glasses with a piece of cloth, Sabbir would reply, "Don't worry, Baba. I am nowhere near any of that." However, this calculated life of Sabbir was disrupted like a storm by his younger brother, Niyaz. Having just entered Kushtia Government College at 18, Niyaz had become obsessed with photography. A second-hand Canon 600D camera bought from old Dhaka with saved-up money hung around his neck at all times. Niyaz's eyes were always inquisitive. Ever since the streets began heating up in mid-July with demands for quota reform, Niyaz could not stay still indoors. After the afternoon of July 16th, the environment in Dhaka transformed in an instant. Sitting in the mess, Niyaz watched on the internet the news of Abu Sayed, who had bravely stood with open arms in front of police guns at Begum Rokeya University in Rangpur and attained martyrdom. His hands trembled, and sweat beaded on his forehead. Niyaz came to stand on the small balcony of the mess. Below, a few broken-down buses still lay on the Farmgate road. Looking toward the distant sky, Niyaz said to Sabbir, "Bia, you study history, don't you? What is the point of reading about the valor of dead people in book pages when living history is being made right before your eyes and you're sitting at home?" Without lifting his eyes from his book, Sabbir replied calmly, "History isn't such a sweet thing, Niyaz. When history is written in blood, it is ordinary families like ours that pay the price for that blood. You need to finish your studies. Stop taking casual photos." Niyaz said nothing. He quietly slung his fabric bag over his shoulder, packed his camera inside the bag, and silently left the mess. 2. The first bloodstain and the sparks of movement. On July 18th and 19th, the streets of Dhaka turned into a battleground. By government order, internet services across the country were shut down. All digital communication with the outside world was severed. Sitting in the mess, the TV channels kept repeating the same news on loop, but the real picture outside was far more horrifying. The deafening thud-thud of sound grenades and the acrid smoke of tear gas seeped through the 4th-floor windows of the Farmgate mess apartment. Eyes burned intensely, making it hard to breathe. People from local alleys were coming out with water and spray bottles to help the protesting students. During these very days, prominent student leaders like Nahid Islam, Asif Mahmood, and Hasnat Abdullah from Dhaka University were leading from the front lines. Following the abduction of Nahid Islam and other coordinators by the detective branch, DB, police, the movement spread across the country like wildfire. At Curzon Hall, TSC, and the Shaba intersection, there was a turbulent wave of students and citizens. Sabbir pulled the window curtain aside slightly and observed. There were no specific political banners on the street. School and college teenagers in uniform, university students, and alongside them, local rickshaw pullers, day laborers, and ordinary working-class people had joined in. Around 10 p.m. on July 20th, Sabbir remained unable to reach his father due to the internet blackout. A curfew had been imposed across the city. The roaring engines of armored vehicles and the heavy thud of military boots echoed through the streets. Suddenly, there was a knock on the mess door. It was not a hard knock, but as if someone was laying a hand on the door with their last remaining strength. Sabbir rushed to open the door and froze. Niyaz was standing there. The right side of Niyaz's white shirt was soaked bright red with blood. His collar was torn, and his knees were scraped. Yet, there was no bullet wound on his own body. He was trembling, his entire body shaking uncontrollably. "Niyaz, what happened to you? Whose blood is this?" Sabbir pulled Niyaz inside and locked the door. Niyaz couldn't speak. His eyes were wide and fixated. He tried to speak, but only a gasping sound came out. After a moment, he pulled his camera out of his bag and handed it to Sabbir. Turning on the camera's small screen revealed a photograph. A young student soaked in blood at the science lab intersection, his chest torn apart by shotgun pellets. In a broken voice, Niyaz began to whisper, "Bia," at the science lab intersection. The boy was standing barely 2 arm lengths away from me on top of a rickshaw, shouting slogans. Right then, a spray of shotgun pellets hit him in the chest and belly. He fell straight onto me. "Bia." I pulled him onto a rickshaw, but before we could reach the hospital, his hand went cold. "This blood is his, Bia." Finished speaking, Niyaz buried his face in both hands, sank onto his knees on the floor, and broke down weeping hysterically. Sabbir could not utter a word. He stared at Niyaz's blood-stained shirt. The overly cautious, fearful middle-class identity he had built within himself seemed to shatter into pieces from within. 3. The red bandana and Mir Mugdo's water bottles. The final days of July felt like Dhaka had turned into a simmering volcano. Even amid the curfew, resistance in the narrow alleys could not be stopped. Graffiti was being painted on walls at night, writing anti-regime slogans in crimson paint. The morning of August 2nd. There was no sign of the sun. The sky remained overcast. Waking up in the morning, Sabbir saw Niyaz silently cleaning his camera. There were no traces of tears in his eyes. Instead, a hardened resolve had settled there. "Where are you going?" Sabbir asked grimly. "There's a massive gathering today at Shaba and the Shahid Minar. Hasnat Abdullah and the other brothers have given a call. Thousands of people will take to the streets. I'm going to take pictures, Bia. If I return alive today, I must leave behind proof of these atrocities for the world." As Niyaz gathered his bag and stepped toward the door, Sabbir spoke up. "Wait!" Niyaz stopped. Sabbir picked up his old backpack from the corner of the room. Taking out a piece of red cotton cloth from the rack, he tied it tightly around his forehead. Then he put on his shoes and stepped in front of Niyaz. Niyaz looked at him with wide eyes. "Bia, you..." Placing his hand on Niyaz's forehead to adjust the red headband, Sabbir said in a steady, firm voice, "You don't need to take pictures alone. If history is to be written today, both brothers will write it together. Let's go." When the two brothers crossed Farmgate towards Science Lab, the sight sent shivers down Sabbir's spine. There were no specific political party banners anywhere. Everyone had come out for the sake of the country. One of the most compassionate faces of this movement was the young Mir Mugdo. This Dhaka University student was distributing free water to protesters on the streets. With his signature gentle smile, "Need water, brother? Need water." He had infused boundless courage into thousands of students. But that day, during indiscriminate police firing in the science lab and Uthara areas, that smiling young man attained martyrdom. The streets were soaked with the blood of the man who had bared his chest to hand out water. When that news spread like wildfire, fire ignited in the eyes of every youth on the street. 4. The science lab intersection and the breaking tide of people. When tear gas canisters and shotgun pellets began firing continuously from police armored vehicles at the science lab intersection, the sky was covered in toxic smoke within moments. The acrid gas made it impossible to open one's eyes, and throats dried up like wood. Coughing violently, many gasped for breath right on the road. Wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, Sabbir screamed, "Niyaz! Niyaz! Where are you?" Through the smoke, the loud explosions of sound grenades rang out repeatedly. People ran frantically in all directions, yet no one was abandoning the field. Sabbir saw a few school students sitting behind a roadside dumpster, equipped with half-liter water bottles and cloths soaked in Savlin water. Sabbir managed to spot Niyaz in the crowd. Unfazed by fear, he stood right in the middle of the street, holding his Canon camera high. With a towel covering his face in one hand, his finger remained glued to the shutter button with the other. His camera lens captured extraordinary moments. On one side stood heavily deployed police units carrying assault rifles, and on the other stood thousands of ordinary youths facing them bravely with pieces of brick and bamboo sticks. Suddenly, a private university student named Arif ran to the center of the road and spread his arms wide. He was wearing a blood-stained t-shirt. He yelled out toward the police, "How much more will you shoot? You've already killed Abu Sayed and Mugdo. Now shoot me in the chest." Arif's fearless act seemed to make tear gas and bullets completely powerless. The people who had pulled back rushed forward again toward the barricades. Sabbir could no longer stand still. Pulling a red flag from Niyaz's bag, he held it firmly in his own hand. 5. The bond of blood and an unknown mother. By 4 in the afternoon, the conflict grew even more severe. The sound of shotgun fire echoed relentlessly through the alleys of science labs. Suddenly, a loud blast occurred near Sabbir. Small lead pellets from a shotgun hit a metallic shop nearby and ricocheted. Right then, Sabbir heard a sharp cry from Niyaz, "Biya!" Sabbir turned around to find Niyaz fallen on the ground. Blood was gushing from his left knee. A metallic shrapnel or pellet had lodged into his flesh. "Niyaz!" Sabbir sprinted over and pulled Niyaz into his arms. Niyaz's face turned pale with pain, but his hands were still tightly clutching the camera against his chest. Just then, an unknown middle-aged woman wearing a simple cotton sari and glasses pushed her way through the crowd. Grabbing Sabbir's hand, she urged, "Son, bring him this way. My house is close by. Come through the alley." Sabbir lifted Niyaz onto his shoulders. The older woman and a rickshaw puller helped carry Niyaz into a 2-story house inside the alley. Taking off her bangles and setting them aside, the woman quickly brought Savlin, cotton, and bandages to meticulously dress and bandage Niyaz's wound. Her hands trembled, tears filling her eyes. "My son is your age too, father," the woman murmured under her breath. "He went out onto the streets this morning as well. I don't know where he is or how he is doing. When I look at your faces, I see my own son's face. May God keep you all safe." Sabbir stared at the unknown mother. It hit him that this uprising was no longer just a movement of a specific group. It had turned into the tears of every mother, the anger of every family, and a massive spiritual bond. Every home in Dhaka had become a safe shelter for protesters. Every woman on the street was now a mother to these brave children. 6. The nighttime phone call and anxiety in Kushtia. 8 p.m. Carrying Niyaz on his shoulder through the quieted alleys, Sabbir managed to bring him back to the Farmgate mess apartment. After dressing his wound, Niyaz's severe pain had subsided somewhat, but a high fever had taken over his body. The nationwide blackout was still in effect. No electricity, no internet. In pitch darkness, Dhaka City felt like a silent graveyard. Sabbir sat on the 4th-floor balcony of the mess in the dark. His eyes burned with exhaustion and strain. Suddenly, the old feature phone kept in the corner of the room vibrated noisily. The screen showed Baba. Taking a deep breath, Sabbir answered the call. "Hello, Sabbir?" "Sabbir. Where are you, son?" Azarel Sahib's trembling voice came from the other end. He was weeping. "We are at the mess, Baba. Niyaz is right beside me." Sabbir tried to speak as normally as possible. "The TV is off, but whatever they showed on TV, things are far worse in Dhaka. People in Kushtia have taken to the streets, the police opened fire. Not hearing from you two, your mother has collapsed without eating. Sabbir, don't go out, son. If I lose both of my sons, how will we survive?" Sabbir looked out from the balcony toward the dark city. At a distant intersection, A few young boys had lit a fire to keep guard. In a soft yet resolute voice, Sabbir said, "Baba, all your life you taught us lessons from school books. You taught us never to bow our heads to injustice. If your two sons hide out of fear in a corner of the room today, with what face will you teach morality to other students in the future? Thousands of our brothers and sisters are bleeding on the streets. If we retreat today, history will not forgive us." The line fell silent for a long moment on Azaril Sahib's end. Only his heavy breathing could be heard. After a few seconds, the old teacher wept and said, "Take care of yourself, Sabbir. Look after Niyaz. I leave you both in God's hands." 7. Factory fires and the call for the long march to Dhaka. When the morning light broke on August 4th after August 3rd had passed, the sky over Dhaka city was covered in a somber reddish hue. The mood of the air had shifted since morning. There was no regular traffic on the streets, buses, human haulers, or CNG auto rickshaws. All had vanished. Only an occasional ambulance sped by. In the small room of the mess, Niyaz was restless. His leg was bandaged, and he had a slight fever. Still, he could not stay still on the bed. "Bia, get me a stick. I can't just sit here in this room." Sabbir held him firmly and sat him back down. "You won't move even a step, Niyaz. You have a shotgun wound on your leg." Right then, news arrived that student leader Nahid Islam, Hasnat Abdullah, and the anti-discrimination student movement had announced their final program, Long March to Dhaka. March to Dhaka on August 5th. People across the country were called upon to enter Dhaka. Sabbir leaned down and wrapped the strap of Niyaz's camera around his own neck. "Your camera won't stay in the room," Sabbir said in a very calm yet steel-hard voice. "Today's history, I will record through your eyes. You will stay in the mess, with the door locked from inside." Sabbir opened the door and stepped outside. Stepping onto the street, the scene before him made it feel like Dhaka City was no longer just a piece of land. It was an erupting volcano. Plumes of smoke were rising from the Tejgaon industrial area. Factory workers had come out onto the streets in droves, holding bamboo sticks, national flags, and posters. People who had spent their entire lives shedding sweat behind closed factory doors had now joined the street as an unstoppable tide of freedom-seeking citizens. 8. August 5th, morning silence and the breaking tide. The morning sky on August 5th was strangely quiet. So quiet that it instilled a solemn and terrifying fear in the hearts of Dhaka's residents. Despite the curfew announcement, streams of people began stepping out from various alleys of Dhaka starting at 7 a.m. At every entry point of Dhaka, Jatrabari, Uttara, Mirpur, Rampura crowds began to gather. Sitting in the fourth-floor mess room, Sabbir was getting ready. The blood-stained red bandana was tied even tighter around his forehead this time. Niyaz sat on the bed. Niyaz simply said in a low voice, "Bia, you're taking the camera. Don't make a mistake with the lens today. If we win today, capture pictures of victorious smiles. And if we are finished, then leave behind the pictures of our final stand." When Sabbir stepped onto the street, the scene at Farmgate gave him goosebumps. Thousands upon thousands of people. This surge of humanity was not controlled by any political party or specific organization. The tide was spontaneous, stubborn, and unyielding. Middle-aged government employees were there, hundreds of garment workers, private and public university students, and countless ordinary mothers and sisters. Everyone shared a single destination, central routes, Shaba and Gono Baban. 9. Fall of barricades and the moment that turned history. 11 a.m. Near Karwan Bazaar, the massive wave of people ground to a halt. Up ahead stood armored vehicles and a heavy police barricade. Announcements were being made over megaphones demanding people fall back. Yet the crowd did not retreat. They kept moving forward with slow steps. Suddenly, the deafening blast of sound grenades shook the surroundings. The front section was hidden behind white clouds of tear gas. Panic broke out, but this time not backward. People started running forward right through the smoke. Sabbir fixed his eye on the camera's viewfinder and pressed his finger onto the shutter button. He saw 4 or 5 university students walking hand in hand through the tear gas smoke toward the armored vehicles. They carried no weapons, their hands were empty, and red bandanas were tied around their foreheads. Behind them echoed the collective roar of thousands of people. Who can stop us? Before that unprecedented moral force, the iron barbed wire barricades collapsed in the blink of an eye. Under the sheer force of the human sea, every obstacle gave way in an instant. Ordinary citizens climbed onto the armored vehicles carrying flowers and national flags. Suddenly, news spread everywhere. The long-awaited historical announcement. Autocratic Sheikh Hasina has resigned and fled the country. People are heading toward Gono Baban. For a moment, the entire city of Dhaka seemed to freeze in a deep silence. People could not believe what they were hearing. Sabbir stood frozen as well, his camera lowering slightly from his grip. And then began the roar of an unbelievable ocean of people. Dhaka's residents let out a collective sigh of relief and breathed in the fresh air with full chests. 10. Tears of red August and the sunrise of a new dawn. 3 p.m. Shaba, the Dhaka University area, and the surroundings of Gono Baban were inundated by the overflowing joy of millions of people. People were crying, strangers were hugging one another, rickshaw pullers were ringing their bells in celebration, and small children were running around waving the national flag. Years of accumulated fear, rage, and heavy sighs seemed to dissolve into thin air in an instant. Sabbir stood in the midst of the crowd, capturing picture after picture, but his fingers pressing the shutter were trembling. Through his lens, he captured one scene after another. An old man shedding tears while prostrating on the ground, a young man celebrating with bullet wounds on his arm, and a mother standing in a corner of the crowd, holding photographs of the martyred Mugdo and Abu Sayyid tightly to her chest, weeping silently. Around 4:30 p.m., heavy rain poured down over the entire city of Dhaka. That rain felt like a blessing. It washed away the pooled blood on the streets, the burnt powder marks of tear gas, and a month's worth of emotional trauma. Sabbir walked back toward the mess through the crowd. His body was exhausted, his clothes soaked from the rain, but the heavy gloom inside his chest was gone. Knocking on the mess door, Niyaz opened it. Standing with the support of a crutch, Niyaz's eyes were wet with tears. "Bia, did we win?" Niyaz's voice quivered. Sabbir said nothing. He unslung Niyaz's Canon camera from his neck and handed it back to Niyaz. Then he wrapped his arms tightly around his younger brother. "Yes, Niyaz, we won. But this victory was written with a lot of blood. This dawn has arrived in exchange for the lives of many brothers." That evening, standing on the mess balcony, the two brothers watched as the clouds cleared over rain-washed Dhaka, giving way to an extraordinary crimson-golden glow across the sky. A call came from their father in Kushtia. Azaril Sahib's voice was no longer weeping. It carried the proud tone of a veteran teacher. "Are you two safe, son? Has the country finally become independent?" Sabbir looked up at the sky. He felt that this blood-soaked August uprising was not merely a change of power. It was the rebirth of a nation named Bangladesh. A rebirth brought forth not by any single leader or hero, but by Abu Sayyid, Mugdo, Nahid, Hasnat, and every ordinary student, day laborer, rickshaw puller, brave woman, and thousands of martyred brothers and sisters, who, with their heart's blood, wrote the history of a free and new dawn. The end.